Listen in as the two business guys mastermind on the Tulsa massacre and what can be built that can't be burned to the ground. Enjoy. This business podcast, the two business guys mastermind, uncovers for you secrets and share tips and tricks to entrepreneurship as they mastermind on how to have startup, operational, and overall business success so that you can go on to get better results. Enjoy.
I don't think anything justifies that.
So, hey, everybody, we are back, and the two business guys are masterminding today, and we're talking about the 100-year anniversary of a devastation of a economic tsunami brought on by anger and fear and jealousy and all kinds of stuff. We're talking about the massacre in Tulsa. And, we're the two business guys, we like to solve problems. And, when we were thinking about putting this show together, we obviously can't, do justice to all of the associated anger, that is felt around this, shame that's felt around this, apology feelings that's associated around this. So we'll do the best we can to talk about this subject. And, John has some points of view, and we were talking off screen. And if you're listening to this, we were talking off mic about, the momentum that's lost in terms of financial momentum. Now, we look at the numbers from back then, 1.5 million, as it's reported in damage. And that's like 30 some odd $million in today's dollars. But the momentum that's lost, John, from having Black Wall Street, having a community where the dollar stayed within the community, where you had people of color buying from one another, right? And then you have no questions of internalized oppression, right? That you may have today. Why we won't buy from why Black people won't buy from Black people. Well, all this, you didn't have that because it was a community of people buying from each other. It was a community of people owning things. That's why they called it Black Wall Street. And, as a Black man, myself, it's difficult to talk about that without getting an extreme emotional reaction to that, and it just, so we want to talk as much as we possibly can about this subject matter. And I think about what could we do? What could we build that could never be burnt to the ground? What could we in 2021 and beyond could we build that can't be burnt to the ground? And it got me thinking, John, about all the times when jealousy or all the times when fear made someone else react. And I think about all the stuff that's in the news now, all this stuff that's happening, right? And it also made me think about like the NFL. You have a guy that says, you know what, I'm going to stand up with my hand up, and I want to not stand up for a national anthem that represents something that goes against a belief. And then they take this man's career away, burned it to the ground, right? And then all that came from that. They just about burned this man's career. Well, yeah, they did burn the career to the ground. So it was like another example, as I started thinking about it, another example of a means by which to take from you your ability to feed your family. But at the same time, I don't want that to, you can almost hear that they didn't want that to spread because they knew what could happen. The financial, if everybody did it and then it offended the fans would stop coming. And if the fans stopped coming, then they stopped watching the ball games, right? So they tried to burn his ability to earn his living to the ground. Another example, right? And from my perspective, I think, wow, you know what? In today's ability with cryptocurrencies, with the ability to create out of thin air, like with NFTs, could something be designed that could not be burned to the ground? And I'm going to be talking more about this. I got some other people that I had planned on talking with about this subject matter. And but the two business guys, we're masterminding on a little bit of that today. John, what are some things that and I know it may be a sensitive subject for you, um, talking about this, because I know your heart when it comes to the Black community. I know your heart. So it's got to be just as difficult to reconcile, you know,
Absolutely,
things of the
absolutely.
past. Speak on that a
And
little bit.
I had made a post earlier this week on Facebook, and it was regards to in 1999 there was an incident in a town called Tulsa, Texas, where 46 mostly African American and Hispanic individuals were arrested for being drug dealers. 46 individuals in a town of 300.
Mm,
Not one witness in the town ever said that any of those individuals had sold drugs to them. It was all on the um, the account of a undercover police officer, one undercover police officer,
mm,
who had a history of just telling lies, and not not being a good person. I mean, cheating the government and doing different things like that. And some of these individuals, this wasn't actually found out that this gentleman was giving false confession until after 3 years. They'd already sentenced a number of these individuals to some up to 300 years in prison. It took an act of the Texas legislature to exonerate all
mm-hmm,
of the individuals,
mm-hmm,
which is ridiculous. And he never end up go. He never ends up going to prison
mm,
for that. And how many lives he affected and wrecked. And this is something. This is a systemic issue. And when we fail to say that it's not a race issue, what we're doing is we're we're being apathetic.
mm-hmm.
We're trying to excuse our inaction, um, and I think that's what we have done for hundreds of years as white individuals, because I truly believe that the number of slave owners, the number of people who believed that that was right, was a small percentage. However, the the worst part about it is those individuals who didn't believe this was right were too scared to speak out. They were scared of their livelihood and what this would. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's an issue. That's the apathy. And and it still goes on today, where we
Yeah.
see, if it doesn't affect me, I'm not going to say anything because I'm afraid that it's going to affect me or my family somehow.
I saw a bumper sticker. Like I say, during this time, it's always a heightened, time because it's just it's anger, that you may feel that I feel when I read stories like this. And there's been times where I've avoided looking at certain stories because I didn't want to get pissed off all over again and have a difficult time communicating, right? So I saw a bumper sticker said, no, it wasn't a bumper sticker. It was a sign in someone's yard and talking about Black Lives Matter and saying silence equals violence. So
Yeah, yeah.
people that don't say anything, silence equals violence, right? And you think about the Tulsa massacres, of 1921, and you see the shows and you get pissed all over again, and then you think, like you say, what? Why could this not be stopped? John, it was brought to my attention that this was a time when they were dropping bombs on this town,
Yep, yep.
right? Now,
It was
1921, it was a crude bomb, but it was a bomb nonetheless.
30 some
Burned,
blocks, Randy. We're talking about 30 some
yeah,
blocks, over
yeah,
1,400 homes and businesses, 10,000. In the numbers, I would imagine the numbers are far greater.
oh yeah,
And
yeah.
everything that I read suggests that records were destroyed
Right.
afterwards because they didn't.
They
This
were
didn't even
trying
hit
to
the
silence it.
this didn't hit the textbook, the history books, until 70 years after it happened.
Yeah,
And that's another thing. When we say, well, we learned in history class, well, just because you learned it in history class doesn't mean that that's the way that events actually happened.
exactly. Yeah. So
Um,
these books about the Tulsa, race massacre, of 1921. Those are some of those books run through an editor, right?
mhm.
The editor has to say, right, and I know we're book writers, and sometimes our editor says, yeah, we shouldn't say that, we shouldn't do that, we shouldn't put that in, oh, this is going to be a problem. And then these books then don't totally represent what was all there, but you can't deny mass graves, you can't deny the momentum lost. The Tulsa massacre of 1921 was a momentum killer, people killer. It was it it never
Economic,
ceases me. It never ceases to surprise me of man's inhumanity to
yeah,
man.
yeah.
It just,
It,
right, and that was that time. And we've seen it. I've seen it as a black man. I've seen it throughout, right, and it just I it's devastating, not just on the economic side, right, but relationally it becomes a point of, again, anger, all these different things, right? So from a business standpoint, we could talk about, again, the momentum loss, the monetary momentum, let's call it monetary momentum, that's lost from that action. But imagine Black Wall Street. I mean, imagine a community that serves as an example of what's possible,
the it,
within a community.
and and what I keep going to and everything that I read is the excuse is just that, is an excuse on why this was done. It was an excuse because, to me, is this is one of the most affluent communities in the entire country. I mean, this is affluence. I mean, you're talking about individuals that own um, train stations and airplanes. I mean, this is
Yeah,
wealth, wealth, wealth. This is high level wealth. And what I picture around this is a lot of, like you said, jealousy. People around saying, oh, there's all this wealth centralized. And when you read, Randy, one of the fascinating things that I came upon was $1 would circulate in that community almost an entire year before
right,
leaving.
right,
Nowadays it's 6 hours.
right, right.
And the power that has behind it, I think, the excuse was just that this was, hey, we're going to come and this is not ours, so you can't have it either. You know what I mean? The
Brutal
gel
massacre. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot you can't leave this to an excuse of what it was left to. That's why I don't even want to mention, what that reason was, because that's just ridiculous.
Right.
Um, and when I
Like you
when
said earlier, it's the reason doesn't matter as much as the fact that it happened.
Yep, yep.
We can get
And
into the details and all that stuff, but that's not what this conversation's about. This show's about the fact that it did happen, right? That was the outcome and the devastation from it, right?
and I've heard the I've heard white people throughout my life, slam the whole 40 acres thing. We've all heard of the 40 acres and a mule, the agreement that was supposed to go into effect at the end of the Civil War, where former slaves were to be given 40 acres of
Sure.
land
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
farm. And I've heard white people, disparagingly say things in regards to that. Well, the memory is so short because European Americans were given 160 acres via the Homestead Act if they agreed to farm the land for 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we it's like somehow we we miss that. We glaze over that and we're just looking at, hey, 40 acres, you
Yeah.
know.
Like I said, there's the devastation is far reaching, and now there's guilt. There's talk of reparations. There's talk of so many things that's bringing about its own feelings
Mhm.
that again begins to stop the communication. I think there's currency in communication, and when the communication stops, so does the currency, the opportunity. And of course, the two business guys, we mastermind on all things business related. And I started looking at this and I thought, if how would I go about solving the associated problems from something like this, right? Um, the is there a way that, or is there something that can be built and created, right? And this is the way, like I say, sometimes having a business mindset, constantly thinking about business and trying to apply them to social situations, to apply them to things. I keep coming up with, man, just what if every single thing that we did that hurts another, it directly hurts us right away, that we could feel it right away, and
Randy, I would argue that it does. We're just blind to it.
yeah, yeah, I
I,
agree.
I believe that when an economy as a whole, not just a sector of the economy, is successful, it lifts all boats. It gives new opportunity to
Yeah,
everyone. And I think this is one of the, but it's jealousy that keeps us all bound down.
right.
It's saying, hey, you can't have that, and I'm going to give up some of what I have, so just to make sure that you don't have that, which is ridiculous
Yeah,
um in itself.
right. And we hear the terms "cut off your nose to spite your face."
Yep.
That the, now that sounds like a silly thing, but like you said, when someone's willing to suffer themselves just to because of feelings that you have, willing to affect yourself just to bring that other person down, or community in this particular case down. And if you listen to Dr. Claude Anderson, he talks about in Powernomics, he talks like, and he's been talking a lot of years about ways to build a community, right, within the Black community, ways to build a base. He talks about building the financial base, digs into that quite a bit. And you guys have to, really get turned on to Dr. Claude Anderson if you don't know him by now. And one of his famous writings, Powernomics, it is a scaffold for something to be built within our community, Black community. He talks about it, and he's been railing against, against the machine, if you will, and being ostracized because it's strong language, and that, like I say, when I start thinking about in the era we're in now, right, what could be built that couldn't be burned to the ground, right, and that metaphorically and or actually, you know, and I started I couldn't come up with an angle, John, that really that I says, okay, we got cryptocurrency, but then laws could be passed,
Yep.
right? That could affect a whole area. Um, if a sector got too strong, well, let's break it up. It's a monopoly. Let's break it up. You know what I mean? So I can't, but I think it's worth the conversation, right? Again, it's worth the conversation to figure out what can be built, that
I,
can't be burnt to the ground.
and I think, yes, this is possible. And I think that I think that's why the Tulsa massacre happened, was because the white people in the area saw this as a threat. They saw Black wealth as a threat, Black success as a threat. And that's what ended up, you know, really stirring the emotions in the minds of this massacre and taking it to that level. I think I think Claude's right. I love his high speed rail from Atlanta to Dallas. You know, stopping in there were four stops: Atlanta, Shreveport, Louisiana. I can't remember the other one, and Dallas, Texas. But where you build business around that, you build Black business around that high speed
Mm-hmm.
rail that can take you from Atlanta to Dallas in 2 hours. Um, I think he calls that the like we call the Bible Belt, the kind of the Midwest, the Black Belt, and that would help lift up that area, which has experienced a lot of economic hardship. And I think it's a phenomenal idea. And he talks about physical. I know, Randy,
I'm a
you like
digital
the
guy. I'm
intake.
I'm,
Yeah,
I'm
you're a digital.
internet.
You
Yeah, all
I
things digital, baby.
I still am a I'm I still like physical assets, and I think, and he even talks about what George Washington says, and I've mentioned this to you: who has the land is who has the power.
Mm-hmm.
I think land is important, and I think that that is going to be something. I mean, if we look through the history of the United States, it was land that was taken from the Native Americans, um, by white settlers. It's the white settlers who refused the 40 acres, the former slave owners, because they saw these things as fear. You know what I
Right.
mean?
And that's what I put
As
down as a note, John. Black success as a threat? Question mark. Are you serious? Are you kidding me right now?
Yep.
Right. But that becomes that continual question. I don't mean to, interrupt you, but that becomes that continual question, right? So when I think about what could be built in the digital space, I think about Byron Allen, buying the Weather Channel. People love information about the weather, right? So he's bought an asset that, but then you can regulate that out of, hey, we don't want anybody that talks about this on the air, we'll shut it down. We'll pass a law, right? So you kind of go, okay, well, what is indestructible, right? And in my notes, I'm thinking about, I says, what could be a level the playing field business, right? Something so good that it has to be, it just gets adopted despite who built it, right? So I think about stuff like that, those kinds of businesses that have such utility,
and
societal utility
and
that
that's I think you hit it, because that's what Dr. Anderson hits on. He's like, we have to look at where are the dollars being spent. The if we as a Black community want to create wealth, wealth that is unstoppable, then we have to own those assets that people are buying. So, if it's, transportation, then we need to own the transportation system. Um,
Right. And
whatever it is.
this is, when we're having these kind of conversations, John, people can't see, the quotes that you're putting around the we, right? Because when and they see you, they go, wait a minute, guy, you don't look like, what's happening here, right? But this, when you're quoting, so when you jump into this conversation, when John is saying we, he's talking about what Dr. Anderson is speaking about, right? The weism in how we as a community, and don't get, you see my last name, you go, oh my gosh, this guy's, who is this guy? You see me and go, well, wait a minute, your last name and the way you look don't match, right? Well, don't get it twisted. It's a brother over here talking. So, but and that's what makes it even more difficult, John, because when you aren't an African American, when a Black American, when you aren't of that race, that doesn't mean you can't talk about it, that have strong feelings about it, and be just as pissed because of it, because of when you see this kind of thing happening, right? And we have to be open to have other people that don't look like us talk about it, right? And I always like to say we, and I use that term pretty strongly when I'm talking about a situation, even if I am not that person, that community, right? Because I think we as a human race, right? We as a society, is, and in certain other communities are strong on we. I used to always, it used to amaze me when I would see someone of Asian descent and the conversation that they would have around lifting up their community.
Mhm.
You know, cars, support, uh, or money flowed back to all of this. Come over. We're gonna, get you a job in our spot, all that kind of stuff. And you go, wow, that's massive support. What's going on in our community, the African American community? What's happening, right? And then we have all of these examples of things that were started and things were burnt to the ground in one way or the other,
And,
right?
and let me interject something really quick. When you mention the Asian community, the dollar circulates in the Asian community now longer than it does in any other community.
Right.
So that's it, and you're exactly right. And Dr. Anderson talks about that as well. He talks about, you know, you walk into a Chinese restaurant and they're like, no, we're not going to hire a white person. No, we're not going to hire an African American person. We're hiring an Asian person. We're hiring people in our community. We only spend our money with Asian companies, those types of things. And that's why the dollars are keep circulating
Strength
within
of a
that community.
community. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, strength of a community. And you start thinking about, well, what's why do we in the African American community have this internalized, or what's going on there? You know what I mean? Well, there's a momentum that's been broken so many times. You know what I mean? And I can't remember where I was reading this, and I should be ashamed of myself that I can't remember this, but somebody was saying something about, well, you got a 400-year head start. Of course you're going to have more. And
Absolutely.
I think it was Dr. Claude Anderson talking about, well, imagine if you're running a race and it doesn't matter if you're Usain Bolt. If the head start is so great, yeah, you're not going to make up from that. But that doesn't mean you don't run the race. You know what I mean? And that's so, guys, when we wanted to talk about this subject, and we started asking, how can we interject into this conversation and this time, and uh, uh, um, a financial conversation around it, right? My angle, of course, is like, what can we build that would be indestructible? And what can we build that's community building? What can we build that fights any feelings of internalized oppression? If you don't know what that means, look it up, right? Um, what could be built and that has such great utility, that is indestructible, it's unburnable, metaphorically or otherwise, right? And like John says, hey, I love to build things on the internet. I love to build things that are all things digital, because I always saw that as a playing field leveler. They don't know what you look like on the internet, right? I mean, if you're building things, imagine if an African American, created the iPhone, you know, and everyone says the thing works so well, I'm using it. I don't care who built it, right? I think about one of the booking calendars that I use, Calendly, built by a black man, right? I
Well,
use it
think about
constantly.
even
It's got great
think
utility.
think about even some of the major successes in American history that were created, like eh, the heart, the for an infant. I can't remember what it's called, but that was done by an African American
Oh,
surgeon. He
massive.
was They wouldn't even call him a surgeon though,
Right,
because he was
right.
African American.
Yeah,
It was the white doctor that he worked with, that he was far more skilled than, that got the credit for that.
yeah. See, look, we could go on and on and on about the contributions that, despite something like 1920, the massacre of 1921, the Tulsa massacre of 1921, despite that, we continue on, right? As black people, continue on and continue contributing and continue having our feelings and stepped on. Continue, we're resilient. I just know, as people, we're resilient, and financially we're going to be resilient, right? And like I say, on this, as we think about this 100-year anniversary, there's no celebration. There's a recognition that, despite it, we're continuing on. We are continuing getting back that momentum, right? Addressing its internalized oppression, addressing that, and addressing the momentum that's lost, and the injustices that continually get heaped down, and moving forward. And like I say, I'm like a hammer that only sees nails. I only see things from the lens of business oftentimes. And I just think so many things can be fixed and corrected in short order through business. That's just how I'm wired, right? Everybody. So if you
And
were
I
listening to this episode,
think if more of us were like that, Randy, I
mhm,
think, and we paid less attention, you know, what someone looked like on whether or
mhm,
not we were buying something, we wouldn't care who created the iPhone. It would just be as successful as,
right.
as Steve Jobs or whoever. I think that we let those things get in our way. We have let race get in our way for too long. As not it, And it goes back further than the United States. I mean, this is something that's, the jealousy of race and bigotry. This has been going on since the beginning of mankind,
Yeah, yeah.
and this makes us weak. And when I say we, Randy is my brother. I believe that we are all connected. I believe that it is our responsibility. And for me, if I were to say them, well, that puts the responsibility solely on someone else. And that means
Mm,
that I have no part of that. Whereas I believe that the responsibility is on all of us to
hmm.
these, do what's right.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're absolutely right, John. And like I say, it's always a dicey subject um, to talk about because there's a lot of emotion around it, you know. But like again, you start thinking about that the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre and all that it meant to a community, to a people, to a momentum, to an opportunity. I was dreaming of what could have grown from that.
Mm,
Just
mm,
dreaming. You know, and we hear a lot of people talking about Black Wall Street recreating it. There's a lot of things that are happening around the world with regard to creating that kind of environment. Um, you know, I think there was a big push real recently about, hey, let's get into stocks and bonds because that becomes an area somebody can't control, can't go and burn down, if you will. Um, let's get into creating digital products because if they have great utility, people use them and they don't know, nobody knows how you look, you know,
mhm,
and in certain cases don't care because hey, okay, this is awesome, this is awesome situation.
mhm,
So I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening around that, you know what I mean, to address that, and that's what I constantly think about. And want to have more conversations about that. I just like to solve problems, and if that's one of the biggest problems that's keeping communication from being real and realized, then let's build around that. You know what I mean? Let's create things of great utility where it is mankind lifting and not mankind's cruelty to one another reminding. Right. So around that, that's pretty much what I had to say. That again, touchy subject, right? You start saying Tulsa Massacre 1921, you start talking about uh, and reading the books and watching the movies that are around that, and it just starts creating that groundswell of anger again, and then in certain cases, fear all over again, guilt all over again for people that said I wasn't there, but I feel a responsibility for it, looking like I look. You know what I mean? So all that comes about again, right? And we just
Ra-
continue to have conversation.
Randy, I wanted to take a moment because I thought this was fascinating when I was doing the research on Tulsa. Is O.W. Gurley? I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but and he moved to Tulsa and in 1906, African American gentleman, and he had purchased uh, a huge plot of land, 40 acres, I believe, and this is what started Black Wall Street. He
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
said this land where is only going to go to African American businesses. This was the foresight, and I thought about the same thought that you were just talking about. What would this have looked like? It would have probably been an economic world powerhouse
Mm-hmm.
today if
Yeah.
this would have never happened. I mean,
O.W. Gurley.
yep, it he had great foresight, and you're right. I wish that that Black Wall Street, Tulsa existed today, without the effects of this, because I want to see what it would have morphed into, because I think it would have been one of the greatest cities in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And Tulsa, as a community, you just missed out. You lost out because you could have been a world power in economic health and job opportunities, and the list goes on and on and on again. But when you destroy your own community, Tulsa, and I'm talking to white Americans thinking that they've only destroyed an African American community, you're hurting everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I was
um,
I was reading, watching some people that had done some movies on this subject, and this is how they reference it. You know, Black Tulsa, right, and White Tulsa, right. So, and then like you said, John, they kept talking about how the effects overall, again, man's inhumanity to man. We see it over and over and over again. and it touches upon your community, and then you can speak from that lens. But the overall effect on us as a whole matters, right? It really does. And when you mention OW Gurley, just imagine the vision. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he's claimed to be one of the wealthiest black men and founder of the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Black Wall Street, and what he envisioned for that community, right? Saying, "Hey, this we're gonna take a patch of land." I think it was it 40 miles. I can't no, not 40 miles. Um, but I mean, the main thing is that he had that kind of vision. And
Yeah.
we've got a lot of African Americans now that have vision, right? And then you now have to put that vision up against, well, what's going to stop it? Who's going to stop it? What is it going to be the circumstance behind someone coming in and stopping this out of jealousy, fear? Don't let them get too powerful, too rich, whatever. You know what I mean? And you start going, then what is lobbed at us to stop us? Anyway, we better stop there before I get too excited and too
I
upset and
but I
unable
think
to go on.
why this is so pertinent and is an issue for the two business guys in how it relates to entrepreneurship is simple, that we have to, as entrepreneurs, we have to support one another, we have to
Yes.
encourage one another. We can't let jealousy and those petty things get in the way, because what we're doing is we're hurting all of us when we do stuff like that.
Right. And we see people are willing to already hurt themselves, right? To cut off the nose and spite your face, are willing to do it. So, of course, we got to de incentivize that behavior, right? De incentivize that mob mentality, de incentivize the creation of, well, this is why we're doing it kind of thinking, right? And imagine if we had more Black Wall Streets and what it could do for, the uh, well-being of a community, right? And the reason why I had brought up this big term, internalized oppression, I was having a conversation with a very smart guy, a hardworking guy, and he happened to bring up that within the African American community is this thing called internalized oppression, right? And I had said, man, every time I talk to you, something amazing comes out of your mouth that makes me now go on this research journey. And I had heard it in a different way. I hadn't seen the term like that, right? But it really comes back. We won't buy from us, and why won't we buy from us? There's an internalized oppression that I believe that your quality or your product isn't as good because you look like me. Are you kidding me right now? And then you have the Black Wall Street idea and approach. Hey, we're in this community. We're buying from each other, right? Because this is what we do. And now here, all these years later, we're fighting internalized oppression. Are you kidding me? If we don't have oppression enough, that we got to fight the internalized. Anyway, I can go on and on and on. Everyone, if you're listening to this episode was, how was really just about John and I wanting to mastermind. The two business guys wanted to come on and mastermind on what could we do business wise, that would prevent a situation like this. Now it's just us, we're just, bringing this up. And if you want to have some more conversation about this, hey, drop us a line, respond to wherever you're seeing this. If you're seeing it online or if you're hearing it, um, drop some stuff in the comments. What are your thoughts? What could be built that cannot be burned to the ground, right? Think about that. And give us your comments. We want to have more conversations around this. And it's primarily from how you respond to what you hear. If it excites you, if it angers you, all right, let's talk about it, right? Because again, like I said earlier, conversation could is a currency in itself, right? Because let's not let the currency of conversation stop flowing, everybody, right? Let's have some fun around being able to talk openly and honestly and with one another, and let that build something, right? And this is the thing about John, when we get on here, we're not just coming on saying, hey, we just, want to spend an hour and flap our gums. No, we want to solve problems. And this is a big one, right? If we could solve this, boy, I'd love it if we got credited with solving the problem around race, because we're going to interject business principles in there, right? And I've got this, my one of my biggest platforms is that things can be solved using business principles, because I know it helped solve me when I was coming up, right? I said if I can just latch on to something that I can pay more attention to than going the wrong direction in life, right? Then it could save me. If I could just you know have something I can hold, some scaffolding that I can build, that it can help me build personally, personal development wise. So you think about a scaffolding that could be created, that could be built upon, that solves the problem. And like I said earlier, it de-incentivizes bad actions toward people that don't look like you, right? Two business guys wanted to come on and mastermind a little bit. John, there's a couple things you want to say before we get out of here.
I think that we just we have to become better human beings, all of us. And we have the reason why it's important that we know history is because the history that we read in the books often is not the accurate history. It's the history that the oppressors want us to know. But we have to do our own research, and we have to do better at treating each other better, at partnering with one another, and realizing that there's genius everywhere.
Mm,
And if we could take off the goggles that are filled with mucky water, we'd be able to see just the talent and the wonder throughout all of humanity. I mean, all across the world. And I think that we would become better human beings and better economically because we would be able to work together better. It's life is a relationship. It's Randy, you and I both are married and whatnot, and human interaction is that relationship. And whether you're looking at it from economic principles
mm,
or family dynamics to mental health and whatnot, the the welfare of the unit, which is the our entire family unit of the
sure,
world,
sure.
you know is backed on how we treat one another, what we do, the value, the inherent value
Mm,
in every single person. um we could we could make this world such a much better place, a place that is free from poverty, a place that is free from disease, all these war. I mean, and you might think I'm a dreamer, but think about it from the possibility of, you know if we were created by this benevolent creator that we were created in the image of,
mm.
we have the potential to be better human beings, to forego jealousy, to to you know to not just look out for ourselves. um
Yeah, you're right,
I
John.
I
I envision that. Just think if the Tulsa massacre of 1921 did not happen. Just think if the massacre of Black Wall Street did not happen, what it would look like today. Started in a community, right? And now here's something that we know from the pandemic of 2021 or pandemic of 2020, um, that we know something small can spread. In that, now that was in a bad way. Imagine if uh, the Tulsa massacre of 1921 didn't happen, and a community built spread, a community of Black Wall Streeters spread, right, and had the virality of this pandemic had, COVID-19 had on the world. Imagine if that was in a good way, Black Wall Street principles spreading in a good way to community after community after community, and and of course not hurting people but uplifting people, giving people
Absolutely.
hope, community, right? Imagine that. Imagine if it had just, Black Wall Street had just been left alone, right?
The
Just
world
imagine
doesn't
that.
the world does not work off of win-lose principles. We have been This is a
These are business
mentality that,
principles, right? The zero sum game, right? It doesn't
right,
work
right.
that way.
It does not work that way. And if we would just get that through our heads, that there's a win-win. And when we are helping other people win, we are going to win. Um,
John, I tell you, with that, John, we can end on that. If we are helping, say that again, John. That was powerful.
if we can help others win, we are going to in turn win ourselves.
That's it. Okay, guys, everyone, that's the show. We'll see you next time, and we'll be talking about something as impactful. We want your comments. Share your comments. Let's talk about this and let's continue on. Thanks again, John.
Thank you.